Section 19 of Recollections of a Busy Life by William B. Forwood. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 19. Recreations. It is a good thing to have a hobby. Perhaps in these days we have too many, and pursue them with too much intensity, to the neglect of more important matters. To this I must, to some extent, plead guilty. I have devoted much time and thought to boating and to gardening. My boating days commenced in the '60s, when I frequently sailed with my uncle, Alfred Bower, who owned some of the crack yachts belonging to the Birkenhead Model Yacht Club, the Presto, Challenge, Enigma, etc. They were large beamy boats, of about 8 to 10 tons, with centre boards. Our racing was mostly in the upper reaches of the Mersey, lying between Eastham and the Aigburth shore. In 1866 I made my first venture, buying the American centreboard yacht Truant, which had greatly distinguished herself for speed, and taking her up to Windermere. She was not, however, of much use on that expansive but treacherous sheet of water. The heavy squalls were too much for her huge sail plan. I also owned and sailed on the Mersey the Glance, 8 tons, Satanella, 15 tons, Saraband, 14 tons, and Leander, 20 tons. I then for a time gave up yachting on the Mersey, and in 1868 bought a racing yacht on Lake Windermere, the Spray. She was most successful, winning in 1870 every race we sailed. In 1871 I was induced to build a 20-ton racing cutter for the sea, and called her the Playmate. She was built by Ratsey, at Cowes, and was the first boat to carry all her lead ballast on her keel, and in consequence her advent was watched with considerable interest. I sailed her for 2 years in the various regattas round the coast, on the Solent and on the Clyde, but she was only fairly successful. The competition in the class was very keen, and the boats built by Dan Hatcher carried away most of the prizes. This was the time when yachting, I think, reached its highest point of interest, and the matches of the 40, 20, and 10-ton classes were watched with great keenness throughout the country. In the 40-ton class we had the Norman, Muriel, Bloodhound, Glance, etc., and in the 20-ton class the Vanessa, Quickstep, Sunshine, etc. We also had some very fine 60-tonners, and an excellent class in schooners. Our regattas were conducted with much keenness, and created great enthusiasm. Locally we had many active yachting men: Mr. David McIver, M.P., who sailed the Sunshine, the Shadow, and the Gleam; Mr. Gibson Sinclair, Mr. Astley Gardner, Mr. Coddington, Mr. Andrew Anderson, Mr. St. Clair Byrne, and others. It is always wise, and I am sure in the long run pays best, to do everything thoroughly, even although it is only for sport or pastime. And when the Board of Trade allowed yacht owners to present themselves for examination and obtain their certificates as master mariners, I entered my name, and was the 4th yacht owner to qualify, Lord Brassey being the first. My sea experience was, of course, of great service to me. I afterwards found my Board of Trade certificate as a master mariner gave me increased pleasure in yachting, and my crew great confidence in my skill as a navigator. Selling the Playmate, I returned to Windermere. Indeed, I had never left it, but I sailed the regattas each year, and in the year 1908 I completed my 40 consecutive years' racing upon the lake, winning for the second year in succession the Champion Cup. The competition for this cup is limited to yachts which have won first or second prizes. My yacht, the Kelpie, was designed by Mr. A. Milne, of Glasgow. She is quite one of the smartest boats on the lake, particularly in light weather. During my 40 years sailing upon the lake, I have witnessed great changes in the designs of the competing yachts. The boats starting with a length of 20 feet on the waterline were gradually enlarged by being designed to immerse the whole of the counter, making the waterline 26 feet 6 inches. We carried about 750 feet area of sails, including in this a huge foresail. The boats were large and powerful, but difficult to manage, and it is a wonder no accident took place. We afterwards introduced a load line length of 22 feet with overhangs, with the result that we have established a very smart and useful class of boat. I built many yachts on the lake: the Althea, Truant, Charm, Brenda, Playmate, Breeze, Pastime, and Kelpie, and several boats for the smaller class. I also built in 1881 the steel launch Banshee. She was designed by Alexander Richardson, and is today the prettiest launch on the lake. I have raced on Windermere with varying success, but it has been the source of enormous enjoyment, and the days spent on Windermere are among my happiest. When we first visited Bowness we were content to reside in lodgings, but in 1879 we rented Fellborough, a charming little house on the lake shore below the ferry. After remaining here 3 or 4 years, we occupied for longer or shorter periods Winless Beck, Loughrigg Brow, Ambleside, High Ray Bank, and in 1889 I took on a long lease Wickfield, at the head of Pulwick Bay, a charming house with lovely gardens, and furnished also with a boathouse and pier. Here we remained until 1902, and since that time we have occasionally occupied Ray Cottage, a pretty dwelling nestling under the shadow of Ray Castle. It would indeed be very difficult to describe the enjoyment Windermere has afforded us during all these years. Our long walks, mountain climbs, picnics on the lakes, fishing, and last but not least, our regattas, filled our days with pleasure, and we look back upon our holidays with sunny memories of great happiness. In 1904 I wrote a history of the Royal Windermere Yacht Club. The Reverend Canon Rawnsley added an interesting chapter descriptive of the lake, and the book was illustrated by some excellent photographs. As a thank offering to God for permitting us to enjoy such great happiness, in 1908 we placed a stained glass window in the parish church at Bowness, representing the Te Deum. In 1880 we built at Lymington a 50-ton yawl, which was named the Leander. In this we cruised for 3 summers off the west coast of Scotland and south coast of England, but I found I could not spare the necessary time, and was obliged to give up sea yachting for good in 1885. I was elected Rear Commodore of the Royal Mersey Yacht Club in 1879, and was for a time also Commodore of the Cheshire Yacht Club. Yacht Racing Association. In my early days of sea racing, being much impressed by the want of a central authority to regulate all matters connected with yacht racing, I brought the question under the notice of Mr. Dixon Kemp, the yachting editor of the Field. He consulted Colonel Leach, a very leading and influential yachtsman, with the result that we formed the Yacht Racing Association. We secured the Prince of Wales as our president, and the Marquis of Exeter as our chairman, and very speedily recruited a large number of members. I was elected a member of the council and subsequently chairman of the measurement committee, which had very important work to do in connection with the rating of yachts for racing purposes. The old Thames rule was played out. Yachts had become of such excessive length and depth that a new rule of measurement became necessary. We took a large amount of expert evidence, and finally drafted a rule which was adopted and remained in force until the present international rule superseded it. Royal Canoe Club. This club was founded in the 'sixties by Rob Roy MacGregor, who had built a small-decked canoe, in which he had navigated the principal rivers in Europe and the Holy Land. MacGregor was not only an enthusiastic boating man, but he was a good Christian worker and philanthropist, well known in the East End of London. Rob Roy appealed to me and others to form a northern branch of the Canoe Club on the Mersey. We did so in 1868, establishing our headquarters at Tranmere. The club was very flourishing, and the upper reaches of the Mersey formed a very attractive cruising ground. But the increase in the number of steamers destroyed canoeing on the Mersey as it has destroyed yachting. Living as we did at Seaforth, I was able to run my canoe down to the shore and enjoy many pleasant sails in the Crosby Channel. Finding an ordinary Rob Roy was too small and very wet in a seaway, I designed and built a sailing canoe with a centre board, which was a great success and was the pioneer of sailing canoes. Gardening. There can be no more delightful pastime than gardening. I may claim this to be my pet hobby. Other pastimes are evanescent and leave behind them no lasting results, or afford no more than a passing pleasure. But in gardening we have seed time and harvest, all the pleasures of sowing and planting, watching the gradual growth, training and nurturing the young plant, and in due time gathering in the flowers or fruit. And in these days when so much is done in hybridizing, we have the added charm of experimenting in raising new varieties. We began to import orchids in 1866, bringing them from the West Indies and Central America in large wooden boxes, thinking it necessary to keep them growing, but we lost more than half on the voyage. They are now roughly packed in baskets or bales, and a very large percentage arrive safely. When in India in 1907, at Darjeeling, I hired 2 men and 2 donkeys to go down into the valleys of Bhutan to collect orchids. They returned in about 10 days with 4 large baskets full, chiefly denrobiums. Among them there was a good deal of rubbish, but also many good plants which I sent home, and which have since flowered and done well. There are no plants more difficult to kill than orchids, but on the other hand there are no plants more difficult to grow and to flower. Their habits must be known and studied, and above all, they must be provided with the exact temperature and degree of moisture they have been accustomed to. But the reward of successful cultivation is great and worth striving for. No flowers can be more lovely in form and in color, and they have the great merit of lasting for days and even weeks in all the wealth of luxuriant beauty. They are the aristocracy of flowers. End of section 19.